So hello and welcome to another video in my series of interviews with experts. I'm Frederick Dunn, and today I'll be talking with author Frank Mortimer. Frank is an adjunct instructor at Cornell University's Master Beekeeper program. He was also the president of the Northeast New Jersey Beekeepers Association for more than 10 years. In 2021, he published a very popular beekeeper book, Bee People and the Bugs They Love. Here's Frank.
Hi, I'm Frank Mortimer. I'm in northern New Jersey in the most densely populated county in the most densely populated state. I go by Frank the Bee Man, and I keep bees as a hobby and a sideline. And I guess like many beekeepers, I'm addicted to be around the stinging insects.
Oh man, that's a great introduction, Frank. I'm really glad you're here, and thank you for accepting my invitation to come and be interviewed here on The Way to Bee. So we have a lot of really good stuff to talk about today, and you're the first author that I've had on in my guest lineup of talks with experts. You're absolutely an expert in beekeeping. And as the cover image showed, this is your book that was published in 2021. And I have to say that it's my favorite bee book and go-to book when I'm talking to somebody that's thinking about beekeeping, because this covers the ground, not just for what they should expect with bees, because the education about the bees themselves is really well documented here. The cool part for me was the personalities and the types of beekeepers new people might encounter. So we're going to start right off with, what was your inspiration for putting together a book to begin with?
So in being where I am in New Jersey, I was giving a lot of bee talks, and also it was a great way for me to raise money for my bee club. So the more talks I'd give, if I didn't know the answer to something, I'd have to look it up or think of a better way to say it so people understood it. And then after about 125 talks, I'm like, I just kept saying it over and over. And I'm like, and I could see the reaction I was getting from people as I would talk about bees and talk about the characters in it. And then so I'm like, you know what, I should write this down. And I should add that my wife and a good friend of mine both repeatedly said, you should write this book. You should write this book.
And your wife, you're talking about Sophie?
Yes, Sophie.
Okay. And so they said you should write this book. Now there's a lot of ground between somebody saying, hey, go write a book, and getting that done. So how did you go about what your approach would be to a book? Because, you know, we've all seen the bee books. If you go on Amazon or you do a Google search, beginner beekeeping books or how to keep bees and things like that, the field is full. There's a lot of them out there. And they're all pretty much the same thing: how to keep bees in your backyard, how to do a lay-ins hive, beekeeping with a smile. And this is different from that approach to teaching people about beekeeping. So how is your book different than any other just educational book about keeping backyard bees or even commercial beekeeping?
Yeah, what I wanted to focus on was the people that keep bees. Like, and that's the always got the, I talk about this in the book, and I'm sure that you've experienced it. When you tell somebody that you're a beekeeper, you get that look. And that look is like, you must be crazy if you're going to be around stinging bugs. And then so as I, you know, and I think that what attracts a lot of people to beekeeping is a sense of being an individual and independent. And that's why there's so many characters. And just in being the president of my club for as long over a decade, then that just is how I met most of these folks. And so it just was funny to me, and I would tell the stories in these talks I had done. People laughed, and so that's why I put them together. So the book really focuses on not just, it's not a how-to book at all. It's more of what kind of person wants to be around bees, and what do they think about, and what do they focus on.
Mm-hmm. And you did a really good job of, by the way, because I've been a beekeeper for quite a while, and you really profiled some of these personalities perfectly. So, and that's not always flattering, by the way, which was really interesting to me, because while I'm reading the book, I'm like, oh man, do these people know Frank is writing about them? Right? Because and so I think that you said also that maybe you don't name people, or some of these characters are fictional. but did you actually get any kind of insulted feedback from people that might have thought you were profiling them?
Not from anybody who I profiled, and some of the characters are a combination of a few people, but the basis of all of them are on real people. So I just, they were fictionalized, but there's core facts about all of them that exist. But no, it's funny. I didn't hear any negative feedback about people. The negative feedback I've received about the book is, as you well know, the number one thing that's impacting the health of bees is the Varroa mite. And so it's important that all beekeepers treat for Varroa. And so and I take a very, because I'm such a believer in science and the need to manage your mites to keep the bees healthy. So the negative feedback I've received is from natural beekeepers, which is code for people that don't want to treat for mites, seeing that I'm trying to push my agenda onto them.
Well, if they want to look at science as an agenda, I guess they can if they want to, but because it is scientifically based and you're affiliated with Cornell University. And if you're going to go through a Cornell program, you're going to learn about and understand how to implement appropriate treatments for mites and other problems that your bees could face. I think it's very good to put that stuff out there. And I'm not surprised, though, that there are people that want everything to be holistic. And I mentioned another book, Beekeeping with a Smile, for example, which suggests not doing any treatments and even suggests not doing any inspections. So these are very different. And that's why I always invite people to keep your mind open. Read, learn as much as you can. There's no reason because one person has a position that you should tear them apart over it, because it's not a personal insult. Just stay open and see what people have to say. If that's not for you, then seek another path in beekeeping. But I'm with you. I'm science-based. And if your bees need help and you have the ability to help them out with whatever the challenges are, by all means, do it. So that's the number one thing that you got pushback on. What did you wish that you had included in the book after it was published that maybe you didn't include?
That's a good question. I probably would have, seeing how the non-science natural beekeepers want to be, I may have framed that discussion a little bit differently. So they could, I think you just said it very eloquently, it's important to see all sides, but to talk more about why I have the stance that I do, which is that when you live in such a crowded area and my bees are touching hundreds of other beekeepers' bees, then really, like, this pandemic that we're living through shows us that it really spreads through a population quickly. So I guess that would be what I would have liked. And it's like the thing with a book is that you have, limited pages and chapters. So it's more of, I'm not sure if I could have squeezed that much more in there.
Yeah, you got a lot in it. As your book is over 300 pages as it is. I read it in 3 days, which, I know some people can sit down and read a whole book in a day. I'm not one of those people. I didn't take that speed reading class they used to advertise in the 70s.
Oh, yes.
I forget what that was called. But anyway, because I want to completely digest what I'm reading, so I slow down. Just like when I'm eating real food, I chew every bite 32 times. When I'm reading a book, I want to get it all. So anyway, one of the things I wanted to talk about too is, so you got the book published, you had a lot of really good endorsements on there, Tom Seeley among others, but how did you go about getting people to write those endorsements on your book?
Yeah, so a lot of them I just begged and pleaded. No, and I'm half joking, only half. I am very excited about Tom Seeley because he is by far the top researcher of honeybees, I'd say, in the world, based on how many accolades he's received, both in the scientific community as well as by the public. So I just sent him my manuscript. And then also on my website, I have a book trailer which kind of sums up the book in 2 minutes. And I
Mhm.
sent him the link to that. And he really felt like it was a good way to inspire future beekeepers. And what I liked in his quote where he says something to the effect of, it's a good explanation to non-beekeepers about what we think about every day.
That's very interesting. That's a very tuned in thing that Dr. Seeley said there. Because you also got the New York Times, San Francisco Book Review. I mean, I don't want to brag on it, too much or anything, but you had to be surprised by some of these endorsements that you received. And the book is doing really well because before talking with you tonight, I scouted around to look to see how people are rating it. And even on Amazon, which by the way is a very difficult area for bee books and pubs because very opinionated people get these books and write those opinions, you have 4.5 stars on your Amazon review. So that's really good too. For those that are watching this video now and want to see the book or see the listings or read reviews, they're going to be down in the video description below, and you're going to be able to find this. So don't go Googling and searching for it right now while you're watching this video. So, so the other cool thing that was kind of a surprise with your book, you do kind of reconstruct a beekeeping association. So you kind of made your observations. You saw the way the meetings were being conducted. They were the kind of meetings that would just make you fall out of your chair and go into a coma or not attend a beekeeping association meeting at all. So did that have something to do with your interest in becoming a member and for example, a board member of a beekeepers association? Because you wanted to see things done differently. How did that work out?
Yeah, and it's funny, in that part of the book is 100% true. Is that I was attending these meetings and you just described them very well. But then I had an overnight camp out with my son inside an aquarium in Connecticut, where you had to sleep on the concrete floors, not being able to sleep in a room with 68-year-old boys on concrete. I literally was just thinking about, gosh, these meetings are so boring. What would I want to know? Like, it really came down to what would I find interesting as a new beekeeper, what each month people, I'd want to hear and why. And then I kind of put that together in my head. I thought of people that I've met at the state level at that point who would be good to talk on it. And then so when we got home, my son and I just kind of wrote it all down before I would forget it. And then that week, I just reached out to those people to see if they would be interested. So when I went to the next bee meeting, I'm like, hey, guess what I did? And I was nervous because I was just more the new guy, but the old timers were thrilled because they wanted to hear a lot of these same topics from the people that I had requested come. And it just, so from that led to me not campaigning, but me being elected as president because they put my name forward. And then people saw what I did like that. And that's how I got into it.
Now, when you did that, and you're right, because it can be daunting, especially when you're one of the new people and you've got ideas, you're kind of dumping the apple cart. And we have these established personalities that often run beekeepers associations. And when I was reading that chapter, I was like, oh man, I know these people. I know all these people. So really, and I think I wrote you about that because, by the way, I pre-ordered your book like maybe almost a year ahead. I think as soon as I knew it was going to publish, I knew I was going to like it. So anyway, yeah. So then when you go in and you see how the meeting's being conducted, you want to make these changes, and then you got elected. Did you see an immediate uptick in your membership at that association?
We did. Once those meetings started running, the new topics, and then also what the also elected at the same time was Rich Schluger was my vice president, and Rick and I started promoting it. So we were not only making the meetings themselves more meaningful, but Rick and I were also pushing it out to get new people to come in. So yeah, we saw a big uptick, and to the point where we had to change locations because we had outgrown the facility that we were in.
That is a good problem to have. So then how did you go about reaching out to people that had not previously belonged to that organization? What did you use, social media? How did you reach them?
Yeah, and this was kind of at the beginning of Facebook. So we were also publishing it, like newspapers had their online classifieds of what's happening that weekend. So we had we would literally send it into the newspaper so they'd publish things that are coming up. And then we started a Facebook page, and we were one of the first Facebook pages in our area. I might want to say the first in New Jersey, and then just started going through Facebook and finding anybody we could to add to the group. So it was a lot of hustle, both in more traditional, because it was, like I said, we're talking, over 12 years ago, which is a lifetime in the internet. And then just getting it out there any way we could.
Yeah, and back then, wasn't Facebook basically a college fellowship?
It was a few years after that, but it was
Okay.
pretty darn at the beginning.
Yeah. And you're not part of that association anymore at all, or you're just not part of the leadership?
I'm not part of the leadership. I'm still an active member in New Jersey Beekeepers.
Because this is actually something I get a lot of questions about, and that's why it's great that you're here, aside from the book, which is fantastic, but you're a great resource right now, because a lot of people write to me, and I've never put together a beekeepers association of any kind. But what kind of guidance do you have for people that live in an area where they don't currently have an association and they want to start one? Where do they start? How do they get going?
Well, I'm going to say, I think that the number one thing that I would recommend is the format. And where I think that some clubs get off the rails is when it's like the president knows best, and they're the expert and they're just telling everyone what to do. When I always set it up more as I thought of myself as like Phil Donahue, where I would interview different people and then get elicit from the different members what they thought. So, with that said, it's important to know that you don't have to be an expert to start a club or to effectively run a club. You just have to be able to find a meeting place and get people to interact in a positive way. So to me, it's like, I would say if you can find a few people, as little as 3, that would get together to talk about bees. And the thing is, beekeepers always want to talk about bees. Like I joke and say, you had 2 beekeepers on a deserted island, they wouldn't even know because they'd be too busy talking about how much honey they're going to get that year. So you don't need many people to talk about bees, and then just think of different topics that each month would want. Additionally, other ways that to attract members, and this is back to my talks, is Rotary clubs, garden clubs, libraries are always looking for speakers. So if you are out there talking to the public, you always say, and here's where my club is, and here's when it meets.
I hadn't even thought of the public library. So they're looking for speakers. Now, you described early on in tonight's discussion, you had a lot of speaking engagements that you used in order to earn income for the club.
Yes.
So how does that work? You charged a fee, but the fee, all that money was your club nonprofit or something, and it just went to support them?
That most speakers get an honorarium for talking. And then so I said to the club, I volunteer my time, but I request that you make a donation to my club. So make the check out to Northeast New Jersey Beekeepers.
And is that, are they a nonprofit, or how did they work that out?
I'm hesitating because they are a not-for-profit, but they're not the right 501c, so it doesn't count on taxes. So it was more of that organizations have a budget to pay for a speaker. So instead of going to my pocket, it just went into the club's treasury.
And that is an important distinction, because the not-for-profit is legitimate, and then there's nonprofit, and the nonprofit is the one that you have to go through all the legal wickets and get that certification. And that's come up quite a bit, actually, in our Beekeepers Association.
But it's most clubs know if they're going to get a quality speaker that they are willing to pay. And schools is another one too, that especially if they have a good parents association, that they happy to fund a good entertainment for the kids. It's educational.
Yeah, so you must have to really change up your presentation. I mean, if you have a bunch of 8th graders, 3rd graders, or what's your limit? Like, what's your age range? Is there a group that you would avoid?
I have done even preschools. So which that is when, at the very young end is where I have to adjust it, because instead of, like the smoker and the hive tool, they're more interested in the bee brush and just being tickled by it. So that's really just the basics. But I've enjoyed, like, third grade, I have done at the one grade school in my area. I did for 7 years in a row. I always find them to be great because they're young enough to have an awe for science, but old enough to ask good questions. So some of my best times have been answering some of those. Like, a funny story with that is I always, when I'm talking about a hive and how bees only come and go from the front, so you can stand to the sides or behind and not have to worry about the bees. I said, it's kind of like an airport. And as long as you're not on the runway, that you're fine. So I said, so you can drive past Newark Airport on the highway and a plane's not going to land on you. And this little boy raises his hand. Well, why is it like Newark and not like LaGuardia?
Yeah. That's classic because it's an 8-year-old telling you that. But it is a lot of fun, and they're exactly as you described, because some of them are pretty savvy. And because I Google them first, what do 8-year-olds know? And then make it interactive, like you said. What I do is I bring a bunch of those fake flowers and I spread them all over the classroom. And then I pick a student and give them one of those bee gloves, the little puppet.
Yeah.
And I say, okay, now you have to go to that flower because that flower can't reach that flower. They like each other. And then I always ask the teachers, are we allowed to talk about that part? And then and then when they do that, now you go back to the hive, you've got that. Now, how do you let those bees in the hive know where that's located? And then this leads into the waggle dance, and we make the kids waggle dance. Now we have bees communicating to bees. Now you have another kid with a puppet. It's a lot of fun. I realize I just derailed that to my own. But
no, that's really great. Well, it's funny. I'll tell you one thing, like, because of age, that when I talk about drones, I always say that they marry the queen and bees get married up in the air.
Okay. I just stay away from that stuff. Is there something that you wanted to put in your book, but you had second thoughts about?
I had an epilogue that just didn't fit with the rest of the book. So that would be it. And with the epilogue, what essentially it wasn't, because what I, for a long time, worked in Midtown Manhattan. And so when I would take the train in front to Penn Station and leave to go out, it just so reminded me of bees coming out of the hive. And here are, hundreds of thousands of people all exiting Penn Station, going their own separate ways, and only, instead of to flowers, it's to their office. No one's telling them where to go, but they all know where to go. And so then I started thinking, in the whole epilogue is about that maybe that we're closer to bees than we realize. And if you look at how bees evolved from solitary bees and moved into the colonies and your social thing, that maybe that we're moving in that direction. We used to be more agricultural farmers on our own. Now we live in cities that we and then you can just keep going down the split of jobs. And even I would say that we're starting to see in some cases that only certain, not everybody reproduces, which again follows the model. And then, so then my final crazy thing there is that, like, if you keep going down this chain, and then also combining that with, if you've ever read Michael Pollan's book, Botany of Desire, and he talks about how plants evolved in ways that would trick, I'll say, mammals to help them propagate. Yeah. So what if honeybees actually, from a genetic evolutionary standpoint, that's why they continue to make so much honey, as a way for humans to then help them spread their genetics. And if you think about it, they're originally from Europe, and now they're on 5 out of 6 continents, right? So you think, because the bees have used people, they use the colonists to get to this continent, right? So, and to Australia, to New Zealand.
That's like, it reminds me of a philosophical thing about chickens, because I do a lot of things about chickens, but a chicken is just an egg's way of making another egg.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so it's kind of like that. But anyway, have you ever used your knowledge of honeybees and your bees themselves to win somebody else over?
Well, I mean, that's kind of, I would say, how I really got to know my wife in that way. Like, we had talked beforehand, but it was funny that my wife is from Sweden, and I always joke that the hottest food spiciest food they'll eat in Sweden is ketchup. And so one day at dinner,
Is that true? What? Is that true?
no, it's
Oh.
they're not, they don't eat a spicy food, but that's an exaggeration.
Okay.
But so I said to her, okay, you have to either have some hot sauce or work the bees with me. And like right away, she's like, I'll work the bees with you. And which surprised me that she actually picked one, but I'm like, why did you pick it? She said, well, I know the hot sauce will be spicy. I don't know if the bees will sting me. So going out to the bees with her, and then just seeing her, and I'm sure when you've had people at your hives, you see the look of wonder in them when you look at them. And that was just so awesome for me to be doing that with her. So that I'd say that's helped win her over.
So then that was her first time ever seeing bees inside a hive and so on. I'm guessing you opened the hive to look in with her.
Yes. Yeah. And took out the frames. I got a picture of her holding her first frame.
Yeah. So, and that's a very dynamic experience for people. That's very memorable. So what you kind of did there is you created a moment that would be burned into her mind. And for those that are watching us or listening on Podbean, by the way, this is a chapter, this is part of the book here, which is why I brought it up to begin with. It was a very clever segue on my part. So, but that worked out. So now she's a full-blown beekeeper?
Yeah, she still prefers the more theoretical than like being in the hives. And now we have 2 girls, 2 kids. So a lot of times I'll go with the kids, but she helps me a lot when I get the honey home, like with extracting, with bottling. And then we also do our own lip balms and candles, and she's very precision oriented. So she helps with all the recipes and stuff.
Yeah. And by the way, while we're on that topic, would you go ahead and talk a little bit about what kind of products you make? You mentioned lip balm, and what do you sell? What do you make related to your beekeeping?
Sure. So I mostly do honey, just the liquid raw honey. I do also make creamed honey, which most of that is only for our family consumption because we just love that so much. And then I do lip balm, hand cream, and now beeswax candles.
Now, how would people, do you sell those to the public then?
I do. Yeah, my website is frankthebeeman.com.
Okay.
Or you can go directly to my honey page, which is frankshoney.com.
Okay, so for those that are watching now, that'll be down in the video description of this video, so you can follow those links and look up some lip balm and creams and things like that. That is something that I've been trying to get my wife to do, and she just won't do it. It's like, these are the products people want. This is wholesome stuff. This is beneficial. So how did you decide on what to make, what to sell?
It's funny. I wanted to do hand cream first because it doesn't use as much wax. And so there's a lot of recipes which are percentages for making it. And then there's all these ingredients. So I kind of went through to figure out which ingredients I wanted to use. And then my wife and I had to experiment with combining that so it wasn't too sticky, it wasn't too oily. And the hand cream actually took us about 6 weeks of trial and error to get it to where it is. So it's like, it remains one of the things I'm most proud of because it took all that time. But ironically, that most people don't think about beekeepers as hand cream producers. So it's not my best seller.
Oh, it's not?
No.
Because of that association. They're looking for a cosmetics group, you're saying, or something?
Yeah, that's what I think it is. But everybody that tries it is like, man, this stuff is great. So I get a lot of repeat customers now.
Hmm. What about like a Whole Foods outlet or something like that? Or do you just do direct sales?
I have a few stores in town that sell it. And they're specialty shops. So
Okay.
a couple of them do sell the hand cream. And because it's like I do bees is my passion. And so I'm not looking to get at this point, because it's just my wife and I essentially, I'm
Mhm.
not trying to get in every grocery store and thing like that. So that I choose the stores that I'm in carefully because they don't compete with each other,
Mhm.
and then they offer quality products themselves.
Now, because you're doing products and things that are derived from your colonies, how does that affect or change your decision making when it comes to using treatments?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, it's, with treatments, as you know, that if you in the boxes that you use, especially like Apivar, which contains the chemical amitraz, then it's off limits for people. So the wax that I'm getting is always from my honey supers. And when my honey supers are on, there's never treatments on there. So I'm just really careful about just using my cappings from which, for non-beekeepers, that means when you bring the honey into your house and you're extracting it, you have to scrape off the top layer of wax so you can expose the honey. So that thing, what I scrape off, and it's very pure because the bees have just put that on within days or weeks of me
Mhm.
scraping it off, and so it's very fresh and pure. So that's what I use for all that stuff.
Okay, well, that's pretty cool too. So now let's go back to the book a little bit. Did you have to get an editor? Who did the proofing for you and stuff like that?
Sure. So it's um the process went like this. So first I had to write it, and then to kind of also swing back to an earlier question, that I did it in steps. Like I'm like, all right, let me see if I can write the first chapter. And the first chapter actually went really quickly. Then I'm like, okay, now let me see if I can write 100 manuscript pages. And then once I hit that margin, I just kept playing these games with myself to get through. Then I got to a point where I'm like, I want to finish, I want to finish, I want to finish. And so it just set my mind to doing that. And then once it was done, then what I had to do was read through it from beginning to end. And I want to do that as quickly as I could so I could have it all in my head at once. And funny part of that is that when I read through it, I realized I had talked about skunks 3 or 4 different times, and they were all identical. So it was at least good that I was consistent. And for those that don't know, that skunks eat bees,
Mhm.
so they'll come to your hive at night, and then they'll reach into the hive and grab bees and eat them, and then that makes the bees very defensive the next day.
Mhm.
So that was one of the things. So I pulled out all but one of those descriptions in the book and things like that. And then it was also easier to see where the holes were. So once I went through that process and got the manuscript to where I felt it was solid and complete, the next step was for me to find a literary agent. And so I had to go through that process of what you do is you send query letters to agents, and then the ones that are potentially interested ask you for more information, and then you have to send a book proposal and then chapters, and it proceeds from there.
And you had never published anything before? Is this your first?
This is my first book. Yes.
Okay. So who told you that you needed to find a literary agent? Is this just Google? How did you find out what you need?
Yeah, it's a good question. I Google, yes, but also, and I went to the library and got a book about how do you get a book published. And so I kind of figured out what the steps were. But the literary, I mean, if you think about how many people want to write a book or do write a book, and then how many publishers there are, it's if you went directly to an editor at a big publisher, that they would be overwhelmed. So the literary agents act as gatekeepers. And so
Wow.
what you have to do is you have to research what agents you think you'd be a good match with, and then you have to reach out to them.
Now, is that based upon what other books they have been involved in the publication of? So you're looking for somebody that's kind of in that same vein?
Correct. And also personality, because the agent is somebody that you're going to talk to on a regular basis, and somebody that really has your future in their hands.
Mhm.
So, so for me, one, how do you communicate with me? Two, do I enjoy our interactions? Three, what kind of connections do they have? Because that's a big part, is what books have they sold before? So
Mhm.
what network do they have so they can tap into that to get your book published?
Mhm.
And so, like, there's a good site, it's called Query Tracker, and you can and I think it might be $75 a year to get the full membership. There's a free version and the pay, and I'd recommend getting the pay one because it gives you more data. And that, and another website, um, uh, Publishers Weekly, um, is, excuse me, Publisher Marketplace. So Publisher Marketplace and Query Tracker are ways to get the data on which agents are selling books and in what categories. And so from that, I was able to target who I wanted to go after.
Hmm. That's really, and I know somebody else is going to want to know, how does the book get funded then? When you get an agent, you get a publisher, do they offer to buy the rights to the book and then publish for you and pay you a percentage? How does it work?
Yeah. So then the agent then pitches it to different editors at the New York publishers. And then when you find one that you wants your book, then you sign a contract, and then the author gets paid a royalty rate on how many books are sold. And then the agent gets a part of that royalty rate. And so, and
Okay.
they're pretty standard percentages of what the agent gets as well as what the authors get.
Mhm. And then how many books, when they're doing a first run, how many volumes with it? Is this also in paperback? I have the hardback. Is this paperback too?
The paperback is coming out at the end of April.
Okay, so right now it's only hardback.
Correct.
Okay, and so ballpark, how many of these did they print?
Yeah, that's something that they publishers will keep that close to their chest because they don't
Okay,
want to let you know. They don't want their competition to know what they're expecting. But
okay,
but then before they will do a paperback, the hardback has to sell enough to warrant it. So that's why I'm
okay.
really happy that they're doing a paperback.
Well, so then you basically said it's doing well because you're at the paperback stage.
Yes.
Okay, so that's good. That's good news. I'm glad, Frank, that that's happening. The other thing is I had a question about, and because a lot of people like to work or drive while they're reading books, so they join Audible. And
And
your book is available as an Audible book. So this leads to my next question. Number one, what's involved in getting it to go Audible? And I noticed that your voiceover guy is Michael Butler Murray. How did you pick that individual to do the Audible?
so I had nothing to do with the decision. That's part of what the publisher does. And that's kind of like, there's trade-offs. Like, if by going to a publisher, they're going to do a lot of the activities involved in making your book a success, and you're also giving them a lot of the rights to do that, one of which is for this. And I was thrilled to death when I heard him reading my book. At times I forgot that I wrote it, and I would start laughing. I go, that's so funny, because he had a way he changed his voice enough for the different characters,
Yeah.
and it just really brought it alive to me. And it was interesting because, like, when you read it in your head, you emphasize certain things, and he chose other pieces, which I thought really highlighted as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, he's a voice actor. He's done a ton of different books himself, and just um, I was pleased with what he did. I wrote him a thank you note, and now him and I communicate a little bit, and just seems like a really good guy.
Yeah, voice acting, that's something I always wanted to do. I wanted to get my own whisper room. I wanted to set it up and just narrate stuff, but then I realized it's super hard work. So you said he's done some of his own, so he also has published books.
He's
And
no, he's read other
okay, so
books
he's
as
done
well.
other books that way.
Yeah.
And you're right, you did do a really good job. And one of the ones that was really funny to me was, I believe you were having guys that collected swarms or something, and they were bringing the hives into your backyard.
Yes. Yeah. That was
And
in the.
you couldn't be there. So there's a babysitter who was conveying by text, I believe, what's going on. And I guess these guys weren't like the smoothest beekeepers ever. And she's like, the one is smoking the other one, and ew, and whatever, there's more bees, or one of them got stung, or one of them's running away, or, it was this whole, but his voiceover part of that added so much to it, because we all assign our own inflection and everything when we're reading a text. But having an audible version can work for you or against you. And in this case, it worked for you really well, I thought. There are plenty of people that reject books and dislike it based on the audible version, which is unfair. But that choice of a voice actor is very important. And I thought that worked great. What part of your book did you feel that he did something interesting with that you thought, wow, that is a great way to communicate that?
Well, one of the things I got a kick out of, I was my wife is from Sweden, and if you met her or heard her speak, you wouldn't detect any accent at all. Like people are always like, oh, you don't sound Swedish. And I say to her, that's because they're expecting the Swedish chef to talk, herder, herder, bark, bark, bark.
For the Muppets.
Yeah.
That's good.
So he kind of gave her a little bit of a voice, and so it just cracked me up. It was very respectful how he did it, but it was just kind of like, what the everyday person would think possibly somebody from Sweden sounds like. And it just made me laugh. It still makes me laugh.
Now, why does she not have an accent?
Good question. In Sweden, they watch a lot of American TV and movies, so they hear how it sounds. So that's why they don't have a strong accent versus like Germany, which will dub it, so they don't necessarily hear it as frequently as Sweden does.
Oh, that's really interesting. And you know what? That's also kind of sad, though, because if they've watered down their own accents because of our influence in media, think about it. Or does she intentionally pronunciate the way Americans would speak?
It's more
can she slip into a Swedish accent?
Only if she talks Swedish. Well, it's funny because I'm like, let me hear you do the Swedish chef. And there was actually an article about this that said that they ran the Swedish chef through some computer and detected Norwegian. So she'll be like, he's not even talking Swedish. It sounds more Norwegian.
Oh no, that's funny too. So now my next question is, with this book doing what it's doing, are you working on another one? Do you have any plans to publish a second book?
I would like to do a follow-up, which I've kind of like laid out what that could look like. And that's just really after the paperback comes out, talking with the publisher to see if they want to do it.
Mm-hmm. Any idea like kind of
I'm sorry,
what direction that might go?
Yeah, and it's like so much like the first book is, and that's why it's so great. I wrote it for non-beekeepers to get like, here's the path that you can get into to do it. But so much has happened, like I'd love to talk more about, some of the research like that Sam Ramsey did.
Oh yeah. Have you met him, by the way? I
have not. Have you?
No, I need to get him on my interview list.
Yeah, he's
fun to talk. Well, you can just tell he's fun to talk to. I mean, I've never met him.
Yeah, I was a few years ago, I was at the Nevada State Beekeepers meeting, and before his research came out, he went there multiple times, like yearly, to talk. They love him. So they've said he is one of the nicest people. And they invite him every year, so anytime he can get back. So yes, so I have heard that he's an excellent speaker and a wonderful person.
Mm-hmm. Just how do you access somebody like that? I don't know. How do you find Dr. Ramsey? He's
on Facebook, so you could always try message him, I guess.
Okay, well, I'm going to use your name, and he's going to go, Frank who?
use the Nevada State Beekeepers. They might listen to it.
Yeah. I'll find my way through to him somehow. Okay, so what are your goals for this year?
Yeah, I'm excited. We're starting. You and I are in the same regional area, so nice weather. Looks like it might finally start getting here. I like to maintain. I have 15 hives. I just want all of them to be healthy, and then I'll see how much honey I can get this year. So that's my beekeeping goals.
So what historically has been your, do you gauge your success on winter survival like most people do?
I I keep track of that. To me, I didn't get into beekeeping for the honey, but I definitely use honey as a measure. So it's how many pounds I average per hive that I get for
Mhm.
myself. So historically, I've been getting averaging 130 pounds of honey for me per hive, and that's after leaving 80 or more pounds for them.
Wow, 80 or more pounds for them to winter on?
Yeah.
Do they, what's it been like? Have they used all of that ever?
I've had some hives that have, because when we have weather that's real high and low, um,
Yeah, that's when they're waking up and using a bunch of resources.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's why people are always like, "Oh, it's a nice weather or nice winter because it hasn't been that cold." I'm like, actually, I'd prefer it when it's cold and stays cold longer, because
get
then,
cold and stay cold. Yeah, and that's when I end up with the greatest surplus of honey in the spring, and we're gonna have that this year. Because I only left 47, 50 pounds of honey on each colony, and they haven't used it. So that's good news. So, final thoughts. Is there anything that you want to share with people, either about the book, beekeeping, organizations, just general information for people that are maybe starting out? What would you like to share?
yeah, I think what I'd like to share is like the best thing that I have found about beekeeping, and you're a prime example of this, is how many great people I've met. And I always, when I think about it, it's because if you think what beekeepers are doing is they're nurturing an organism that isn't going to love them back. It's not like a dog that's going to come lick your face. So I think that beekeepers naturally have this nurture gene, I call it. And because of that, I think beekeepers make great friends. And you think of how many beekeepers will go out of their way to help another beekeeper to be successful.
Mhm.
And and as I've traveled both nationally and also internationally with beekeepers, it's great that how our passion can overcome any geopolitical borders, any language barriers. It's all about the bees, and as long as you like the bees, nothing else matters. And I think that's awesome.
Any chat? That's great. And by the way, thanks for the compliment, saying I was okay. And have you thought about going to the Hive Life conference down in Tennessee?
You had told me about that. I would love to do that, and I work remotely, and my boss is in Tennessee, so that's another reason for me to get down there.
Because that was my very first time to go to any kind of conference, and it was just a huge gathering of beekeepers. And it's the way you described it. These people had never met each other, and it was like a huge, almost like a big family reunion that you would have at some big campground somewhere. Everyone kind of, if you're on YouTube or whatever, they would recognize you and talk to you and kind of have a feel for who you are. But it was so cohesive. Just everybody just instantly became friends. It was just a fantastic experience for me. You've probably been to beekeeping conventions and things. Which conventions do you normally go to? What are your priorities for the year?
That I have only really attended the New Jersey ones, or if I'm invited to talk at some other beekeeping ones. Like, so I've talked to a lot of beekeeping clubs, but the biggest one I've gone to is New Jersey State Beekeepers myself.
So you don't go to EAS or Apimondia or
I would like to start going, having a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and then as they were much younger, that kind of prevented me from going to those.
Mhm. Now you've got a 7-year-old. Is your 7-year-old interested in keeping bees? Do you have suits?
Yes, I have suits for all of my kids, and I have a son who's 18, and when he was in kindergarten is when he started helping me with the bees. And
Mhm,
both my daughters, when they were 3, I had them holding a frame of bees,
mhm,
and it's great because like they really, kids absorb so much, so they like the facts about bees they really know, and it's
mhm.
awesome when they'll correct an adult on that's not a bee, that's a yellow jacket, and things like that.
It's amazing what they can learn. And do you know what the number one thing is that children dream about?
No,
Animals.
that
So it's their interactions with animals.
that makes sense. Like, because my youngest is very much into nature, and like not just animals, but also plants and stuff. And so what you just said would absolutely be true with her.
Mhm. That's great. Well, I want to thank you again, Frank, for coming on and doing this interview with me. You have really interesting stuff going on. I'm really happy for the success of your book. And are you still teaching a class at Cornell?
Yes, I am. And that's,
So has the Master Beekeeper program started there?
yes, I'm currently teaching the first of 4 courses. So it's one of my favorites because that's when people, they a lot of them haven't been in school in years, and so it's their first taste of it, and they're all excited to be learning all this information. And that's the bee biology. So most people haven't gone that deep into the hormones and the anatomy of a honeybee.
So that's interesting too. And I heard a rumor that Cornell's Master Beekeeper program is like full. Like you can't. When's the next opening? Or like 2024?
Yeah, it's like I think it's like a waiting list now. It takes like 2 years before you can join it. Yep.
Think about that. And what do you attribute that to? This interest in becoming master beekeepers? And maybe this is a good time to explain what is a master beekeeper and what's the purpose of getting that certification.
Sure. So a master beekeeper is somebody who takes it to the next level of knowledge, and that knowledge is then tested to confirm that they know it. So it's not just how to working the hive, but what is the biology of the bee. And so you understand why they do certain behaviors and what impacts that. And then also to really dig into deep these issues like with mites and other diseases, of the causes, the treatments, and recognizing it. So it's a way, I think, one, to be more educated, and 2, what I always say about the Cornell program, its specialty is to get people to think and to talk about their bees with a scientific basis.
That's a very good explanation. Yeah.
And the reason I'd say the Cornell program is doing so well is because of Emma Mullen Walters, who set it up. I mean, she's the senior bee associate at Cornell, and it's all the research that she did and producing the content in the course that makes it so fabulous. So that's 100% on her expertise as to why the course is so great.
And what part did Emma actually get that course on its feet and get it rolling, or what is?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, it's and what's interesting is that Cornell, Roger Morse, who was a professor at Cornell, is who developed the very first master beekeeping program. And then Cornell, this is back, decades ago, that he was seeing that the enrollment was waning. So he actually brought the program to EAS, Eastern Apiary Society, to right, EAS, yeah.
Eastern Apiculture Society, yeah.
Yeah, so he brought it to them. So the program that was started at Cornell is now what EAS runs. And so years later, then Emma was brought on to revitalize the Cornell program. She researched all the other master beekeeping programs that are out there, and that's how she differentiated the Cornell from the existing ones.
Okay. And for those that don't know, that's at the DICE lab at Ithaca, New York, which is for honeybee studies. Is that the profile for it?
Yes. And DICE, for those that do like creamed honey, the DICE method is named after Professor DICE, who developed it and was a professor at Cornell.
That's an excellent tidbit of information, Frank. Well, thanks again. I've had a great time talking to you, and I hope other people enjoy watching this. And for those that are listening through Podbean, the links are also in the Podbean description. And the rest of you can look down in the video description for links related to tonight's discussion. Thanks a lot, Frank. And
thank you, Fred. This was wonderful. And I hope you and your bees have a great spring and summer.
Thanks, and the same to you. Take care, Frank. All right.
Well, that wraps up another interview. I'm so glad that you were able to join me. I hope you may have learned something new, and there are many more interviews yet to come. So I invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and or follow the Way to Bee podcast on Podbean. I wish you all the best in beekeeping. Thanks for being here today.